Hey, welcome back, everybody. Of course, you know me. My name is Dr. Keith McNally, and this is the Question Guy podcast. And you know me with names. I try to get it right. I'm here with Lauren Fonville.
Yes, you got it.
Yay. Okay. And so we are in season 4 of the Question Guy podcast. And this is really exciting for me because I'm having deeper, more passionate conversations with people who have gone through quite literally hell in some points and have transformed their lives because of that. Now, your hell happens to be stress and anxiety. And so we really need to take a deep dive into that because although many people feel stressed in their daily lives because of work or whatever's going on at home, yours is a bit different because it encompassed your entire life and you had to figure out how to survive it. Not only
Mhm.
survive it, heal from it. Let's get into that story.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me on the podcast. I appreciate it. My story starts, like you said, with my anxiety and stress, and I think I was always an anxious person, but it was something that I could control. It was something that I was able to keep the lid on. And then, things really began to hit the fan, shall we say, when we found out that my husband was going to have to deploy again. And we have been through deployments. We had done other deployments before this, but at this point, he was in the reserves, and I was living with the assumption that that meant that he was not going to have to deploy. So when we got this news, it really came out of left field, whereas the past deployments, I knew they were coming. There was more of a preparation phase for this. So this just came out of nowhere. And because of, I think that that's why my anxiety just went through the roof. I wasn't able to mentally prepare for what was to come. And that's when I found myself having panic attacks. And after experiencing that several times, I knew I had to figure something out and I needed to figure out a way to manage it. It started with going to the doctor, and most times when you go to the doctor, they're going to write you a prescription, and they did, and I tried it, and I did not like the way that it made me feel. And that's not to say that I'm against medication by any way, in any way at all. I think that there is it can be very helpful for people. And there's people in my family that are on meds, and I am not against it in any way. But for me, I wasn't happy with how it was making me feel. In some ways, it was almost making me feel more anxious. And I decided that I was going to try a holistic approach. And if that did not work for me, I kind of made this deal with myself that I was going to give myself a month. And if I didn't notice any shifts, I was going to go back to the doctor and try a different medication. And so
Well, that's a lot.
yeah, man, it was a lot. It was a lot. And so I, in reflecting back on that time, what I realize now is that in difficult times in my life, I would go to yoga. I didn't really realize that then, but in looking back now and the times leading up to that, yeah, I would go to yoga when things would get tough.
So what is go to yoga? That seems like a slang for something. What does that mean actually?
Yeah, so it was just a way for me to feel better. Like, I guess that was just a place that I could really focus on myself, where I had that permission to focus on myself. And so we had just moved to a new state, and I went into this new yoga studio, and there was a poster for yoga teacher training, which is something that I had thought about over the years, but never took action on.
So this
And
is still in your
mhm.
anxious state. Like,
Yes.
okay,
That was my first step. Like, I didn't know what else to do. I'm like, I'm going to go to yoga. Maybe that'll
okay,
help me feel better.
okay.
And that day, there was a flyer, and something deep within me was like, this is what you need to do. You need to sign up for this yoga teacher training. And so, as someone who usually, makes the pro and con list, weighs it out, goes back and forth, talks to a million people, like, that is not how I did that. I really just went with that gut feeling of, there's a reason why I'm here today. There's a reason why I saw this poster. This is what I need to do. And I signed up for it. And that training started the weekend after my husband was scheduled to leave. So I felt like the
Scheduled
time,
to leave or actually left?
when he actually left.
Okay. Okay.
So logically and logistically, it didn't exactly make sense for me to do that because I had two small children. I didn't know how I was going to, get daycare. I was in a new city. But I just was determined. I was like, I'll figure it out. I need to do this. And so I did. And so in that practice of going to yoga and being in the studio a lot, whether it was for the classes where I was learning or just going to yoga classes, I was around people that were into energy work, that were into healing in different modalities, and that was where I was really introduced to sound healing and meditation. And I shortly after joining the studio, I signed up for a coaching program, and it was in that coaching program that I was introduced to tapping. And tapping was something that really helped me to feel calmer in my body. And I just kind of took off from there, and
Well,
eventually,
before you get any further, let's
yeah.
talk about those pieces. So, energy, tapping, give me and at least me, at the very least, maybe our audience too, some insight into what that really means. And so, what is energy healing, and then what's tapping?
Yeah. So energy healing for me is this idea of really just tuning into how you are feeling individually, physically, emotionally, that whole mind, body, spirit connection. And figuring out what tools are going to help you to feel better. And so for me, it started with yoga, then I was trying meditation and going to these sound baths. And these are all different tools that help you to move energy. And I know talking about energy can be
Well,
challenging.
in our first call, you called it something. You equated it to
So
lines go
what did
ahead.
I do? I'm like, I
Um,
don't remember. What do we
Well, in our pre-call,
uh-huh.
you said think about in terms of like lines on a map or something like that.
Oh,
That
the
the
meridians.
meridian, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, so the meridians are part of Chinese medicine,
okay.
and when you're doing tapping, you're tapping on the end points of those meridians. So that's how our energy moves through our body. So it's this idea that our energy can kind of get stuck, and it's a way of moving it to feel better. For some people that's exercise, right? For some people it can be singing, or there's all sorts of different ways that we can move our energy. um, and I also like to talk about the emotions, and how the definition of emotion is energy in motion. So it's this idea that our emotions want to move and be felt. And that's why sometimes we can feel that stuck, stagnant energy if we aren't allowing ourselves to feel our emotions. Yeah.
But it also sounds like movement in some way, form, or another is important. Like the body needs to move.
Hmm.
Yoga is a form of movement. Exercise, and that's my go-to, is a form of movement. And what is movement, but it's a form of, and tapping is still movement. And you're
Yeah.
actually moving your body. Can you talk about that a little bit? How does tapping actually help you move energy?
Hmm. Yeah.
I'm really
So
curious.
tapping is also referred to as EFT, and EFT stands for Emotional Freedom Technique. And it is that process to help you find freedom from your emotions. So when describing this practice to people, I often compare it to acupuncture because people are more familiar with acupuncture. So if you go to an acupuncturist, they take those tiny little needles and they put them in at certain points of your body. With tapping, we are gently tapping or applying light pressure to some of those same points on the body. And then there's this added component of speaking out loud and acknowledging the emotions that you are feeling.
Hmm.
And doing so helps to regulate the nervous system so that you can feel more calm in your body and reduce that stress response that we get, whether it's because of anxiety and stress or physical pain issues or whatever is triggering you.
Now, I know people who are in the audience watching, listening, who may be in a situation where life is stressful. And they may not be having panic attacks, but they definitely know their life is stressful. Most of us want that on-off switch, that magic mixer or elixir or whatever you want to call it,
Mhm.
that makes everything great.
Mhm.
But I'm thinking that's not how this really works. There's no on-off switch.
Would
How
be
does it
nice if
work?
there was, but no. This is more, I describe it more as a process of peeling back the layers to get to the root of why you are really feeling the way that you're feeling. Because a lot of the time, we have these experiences in our lives, and those experiences have emotions attached to them. And
Mm,
when the emotions are uncomfortable emotions like anger, sadness, frustration, overwhelm, we don't like feeling those things. Those That's not like the warm and fuzzy, right? So we tend to stuff that down, we push that stuff down, we repress it, and then we focus on something else, we distract ourselves. And that can be a coping mechanism in the moment to help you, keep going. It's a way of protecting yourself from feeling the feelings.
mm.
And while that can be effective in the moment, I think what we all know is that over time of stuffing all of those feelings down, they're going to build up to a point where they're going to come out in some way. And sometimes that can be emotionally explosive, yelling even, or having some sort of outburst at somebody that doesn't necessarily deserve it. And
Mhm.
sometimes that can show up physically. So, there's a lot of emotional contributors to physical pain. And I think most people can relate to that, especially with stress, because when you're feeling stressed and overwhelmed, where do you feel that in your body? Most people respond to that immediately with an answer. Oh, I get tension headaches, or I get, a lot of pain in my neck and in my shoulders. But it's not just with stress that we feel things physically. It's with any emotion that we aren't allowing ourselves to feel and process.
Can we excuse the pun, can we tap into that a little bit in terms of why we and this may not be your area of expertise, but why do we stuff stuff down? I know we
Yeah,
don't
I think.
want to feel things, but you are now a coach in this arena.
Mhm,
And we're going to get to that, hopefully that conversation in another episode of Coach's Corner. But knowing why we suppress negative emotions is really good for us to understand.
mhm.
Do you have some insight into that?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first and foremost, like we just said, is that it's uncomfortable. We don't like feeling those things. But sometimes it's a way of protecting ourselves, right? If you have maybe a parent or an adult in your life when you were a child who was saying things that, you weren't good enough
Mm,
and you can't do this, or, making you feel small, that's not stuff we want to think about every day. And so it's things that we have shoved down. And sometimes those are memories that, you are aware that maybe it's like that adult's voice that's in your that negative voice in your head. It kind of mimics that
yeah,
person.
yeah.
But sometimes there's things that have happened a long time ago that we don't remember, that's like deep down in the subconscious. Like maybe there's something that a teacher said to you that you haven't thought about in years, but then when you start tapping about how you're anxious about giving a presentation at work, all of a sudden you have this memory of when Mrs. Smith told you, that you were terrible giving that presentation, or whatever the case may be. And so you don't necessarily recognize how these things from the past still are impacting you today. So it's a way of protecting ourselves, of just shoving it away so we don't have to feel it.
I like that you said it's a way of protecting ourselves. I think that's one of our instinctive mechanisms that we want to feel safe in some way, shape, or form. Um, Now, just as some background for me, when I first graduated college, my first degree was social worker. So I dealt with kids who had behavioral problems. And, we see a lot of that negativity. We talk about emotional that do come out as behaviors. And so a lot of those behaviors are explosive, they could be violent, or they could be attention seeking, whatever that looks like, even to the fact of being criminal. So I could see the value of what you're doing and how you teach people in your scope, not to be stressed, but just in terms of the larger scope of really helping us navigate our emotional systems, would be so fantastic. And the more conversations I have with people who are in your space, really does provide some insight for me, because, I grew up with Western medicine, and it's easy to take a pill and, I'm feeling great, right? And that's what we do in the mental health system. We diagnose people, and psychiatrists prescribe meds, and that's supposed to be the answer to cure all, right? The panacea. But there's got to be more. There's got to be some greater insights in understanding humans as being human. We are, as you said, a combination of mind, body, spirit. How does the mind, body, spirit? Now I got to know, because I'm the question guy here, and this is the podcast. How does it all work together? How does the mind, body, spirit, is there a secret to how that all fits together?
The secrets, yeah. Well, I think it's just, I mean, honestly, I think it starts with quieting the mind and tuning inward, really holding space for how you're feeling.
Mm.
And sometimes it's easier for people to start with the physical feeling, right? So maybe it's like, oh, I have this tension in my chest. And so you can start with that and put words to how you're feeling, this tightness in my breathing, this constriction that I'm feeling, and use those words as you're tapping on the points, what it feels like. Does If you close your eyes and you tune into this sensation in your chest, you get a picture in your mind. Does it feel like, I don't know, I've had people describe like a volcano that's about to erupt,
Right.
or if you're a visual person, sometimes it comes easy to you if you just close your eyes and picture something, and you can use the words to describe that. And then as you move through that process, it really is this process of connecting the dots. So if this, then, the practitioner's job is to ask questions. So if this sensation or this picture that you're seeing could speak to you, what would it say? Beginning to put some words to it, and that can help you connect the body to the mind. Or if you are talking about how you're feeling really, let's say, sad, and you are talking about maybe the loss of a loved one, and then if you could feel that in your body, where, what sensations do you notice in your body? And so you really begin through this process to create some awareness of what you're thinking, how that's showing up physically in the body, and then vice versa, what you're feeling physically and what thoughts might be attached to that. And so it's like a slow unfolding and awareness that can occur through the tapping process.
So getting back to you, you went through a crazy, chaotic time in your life, and you need to figure out how to balance it all. And you found a mechanism, an avenue, a pathway of healing. We said it doesn't come easy. It's not an overnight switch, it's not an overnight change. But I got to ask, at what point in the journey, at one point in the path, did you actually feel healthy or whole, or maybe how did like yourself again, or maybe even a better version of yourself? When did you
Yeah.
recognize that this was good?
So honestly, I recognized that that tapping in particular was going to be a tool that was going to help me from the first session that I had, and that was simply because there was so much physical sensation that I was experiencing in my jaw and in my neck. So I have TMJ, and when I get really stressed and anxious, my TMJ can flare up. And so when I had my first one-on-one tapping experience and was told that this could help physical pain, I was very skeptical of that. And in that first practice, I went from a 8 on the pain scale down to a 2. And so it became abundantly clear to me that there were emotional components that were contributing to the physical pain.
Mm.
That's not to say that like, immediately solved everything for me, but it made me very curious about the process itself, and I wanted to continue to tap and explore that. But as far as, really feeling better, I would say, I was working with a practitioner for months. And it was a slow process, but I think all along I knew, like, I'm like, oh, this is the thing, this is helping me. It was really creating that awareness from the get-go.
You're in a very I'm going to change gears for just a little bit.
Okay.
You're well past the point of I think, ever having a stressful event. Well, not that the event won't occur, but you know how to deal with it.
Mhm.
You have a very unique environment where you're sitting in. Can you talk to me about that? So what do I see and why do I see it and why is it important to you?
Yeah, so I often refer to my office as my Zen den. And I have, honestly, I just have things in here that make me smile. The Buddha that you see back there was something that I found in my dad's basement, and he's a collector of all sorts of things, and I liked it and was like, "Hey, Dad, can I have that?" And he said, "Yes." And then I am a big collector of crystals, which you can kind of see behind me on that desk. My essential oils. I've got a lot of angel cards back here. Yeah, they're all different things that I like that make me feel good, and that's always what I'm encouraging people to do. If there are whether that's tapping, a lot of people that come to me after they've tried different things that haven't worked for them. Maybe they talked to a friend who mentioned tapping, or they saw it in a documentary, or whatever the case may be. So when you are exposed to different things, and I call them like little taps from the universe, whether it's somebody asking you to go to a class, or you read about something and you think, oh, that's interesting, allow yourself to explore that, because you never know what's going to be the thing that's really going to help you to feel better. And so I'm all about exploring those different things and incorporating them into my practices and then sharing them with my clients. So it's kind of like a collection of all of those things in this room.
Well, like I said before, I do want you to come back and talk about your coaching practice, but that's another conversation. Before we end this call, I would like for you to give our audience something that they could either think about or something that they could literally practically do as a result of this conversation, as a result of listening to you,
Mhm.
because somebody might be stressed today
Mhm.
and they just want to feel better. They just want to
Yeah.
feel good again. And stress doesn't give that to us. Can you give our audience something that they could use today? Just one thing?
Yeah, sure. So with tapping, there are points that are part of the protocol, and you can tap on those points and speak out loud to acknowledge these emotions. But sometimes you're in a place where you can't necessarily, start tapping on your head without people looking at you and all of that. So I like to share some more discrete points. So this is something that you could do whether you're in the office and you're feeling overwhelmed, or you're in line shopping and you're feeling stressed out waiting. If you just squeeze the at the bed of the nail on any finger and take some deep breaths, that is going to these are the end points of the meridians. And so just taking some deep breaths and squeezing on these finger
How do
points
you squeeze like
on the
this way?
sides. Yeah.
Squeeze the sides? Okay.
Sides. Yeah. Squeeze on the sides of the bed of the nail on any
Okay.
finger. And just take some nice deep breaths. That is going to send a message to the amygdala in the brain, which helps control the fight or flight. And it's going to send a message to reduce the amount of cortisol in the body, which is the stress hormone. So, there's that added benefit of talking and speaking out loud about how you're feeling. But just for today, you can just squeeze those points, take some deep breaths, and that is going to help you feel more calm and grounded in the moment.
Lauren, I appreciate that. And I think there's no better way of ending this particular conversation than giving our audience something that they could do, even in the office when they're feeling stressed. Thank
Yeah,
you for this
perfect.
conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today.
For those of you who are watching and listening, I'll see you next time. Take care.